Hi there, and welcome to the third installment of Inking and Drawing in Inkscape. So this is basically where we left off in part two, although I have gone ahead and added some of these tedious lines in the hair, a few other bits of line work, and outlines that I've gone ahead and done, things that just take time but that we've covered in the last video. I also changed the colors a bit to suit my personal preferences. So we're almost finished, but we're going to add some of the details that will really make this drawing come alive. So we're going to add some shading, we're going to add some darkening in the hair, we're going to add some of this line work, which I'm going to show you a shortcut to produce. So let's go ahead and get started, first of all, with the shading on the hair. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to block out this little section here, and I'm going to add a color on top of the hairline in order to do this. So what I want to do is I'm going to create an object that is larger than the area I want to cover, and I'm going to bend it into the shape of the shading. So what I want to do is I want to cover this darker area here. So I want to bring this up, and I want to follow these lines a bit. Let's zoom in here. Actually, maybe I will open my color menu and just give this a transparent color just so you can see where we're going with this. So this is going to be my shading area. So I'm trying to follow the contours of the hair that I've already drawn, just so I don't have to bother to adjust any of that line work that I've done already. But what I want to do is darken in this lower area, and if possible I'd like that to happen underneath of this line that I already have created. And I'm going to play a bit with this section right here. So I'm going to add in an extra point here. I'm going to make it a corner by clicking this little button right here, and that gives me independent control of these two curves. And then I'm going to follow this line out to fill in this dark area here. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with that. So I've got the area blocked out that I want to be a bit darker. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a duplicate of my hair here. And this is going to be the border at which this gets cut off. So I've duplicated the hair. I'm going to hold the shift button and I'm going to select the new shape that I just created. Then I'm going to select path, intersection. And that's just going to cut that right off at the border of my hair. Now I'm going to turn off the outline, and I'm going to lower this down until it goes under the hair and all of the line work that I've done here. So I'm just pressing this. There's a lot of pieces that I'm going under, so it does take a little bit of time, but that will do it. And I see that I have to tweak this just a tiny bit. Perfect. Okay, so there's our first bit of shading in the hair. I'm just going to save us some time on the line work. I do feel like this line maybe needs to be a bit darker for it to stand out. There we go. Okay. So that's our first bit of shading, and I think I'm going to throw a bit more shading in up here. Although I'm not really sure that I agree with the way this is shaded. Maybe we'll ignore that and we'll move on to some of our line work down here. So I like the way this hatching works here, so I'm going to try to recreate that but in a much easier way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a line, and I'm going to give that some thickness similar to what we have in the hatching here. So I'm going to go to my stroke style, and I'm going to thicken that up. Maybe something like this. And I'm going to make this stroke a path. So I'm going to go to my give it some extra length. You'll be thankful for it later. We're going to go to path, and we're going to choose stroke to path. And that's going to make this outline, this line, into its own object. So I'll just show you here. You can see that it's an object now that we can edit. And then I'm going to duplicate this. So you can right click or duplicate or use the button right here. I do like to use the button. And I'm going to bring this line up to the top of my cross hatching. Okay? And then I'm going to shift select these two objects, okay, that are both paths. And I'm going to go to my extensions, and I'm going to choose generate from path, interpolate. Okay, generate from path, interpolate. All right. So what this does is it's going to create a series of transitions between these two objects, basically. So I'll show you what that's going to look like. Now that's way too many lines, obviously. So I'm going to have to cut that back to, say, we'll try 16. That's a little better. I think I'm even going to go lower than that. I may have made these lines too thick. We'll go with it and we'll see what it looks like. So let's try that again. Extensions, generate from path, interpolate. I'm going to cut it back to, say, 10 steps. We'll see what that looks like. Okay, so this is giving me a kind of hatching. But what I want to happen is I want these ones to be closer together and these ones to be farther apart. And I can do that by using this exponent setting. So let's see what happens here. So this is giving me the opposite effect that I want. It's getting closer at the top and farther away at the bottom. So we'll go down and we'll go into the negatives so that we get these at the bottom to be closer together and gradually spreading out at the top. I think I will go with the extra. Yeah, okay, I think I'm happy with that. And I'm going to just click apply when I'm done there. So what I have now is my original path, and then I have this group of other paths here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift select this middle piece. So now I have all three. I have the original two, and I have this new bunch of lines selected. And then I'm going to click Object, Ungroup, and it's going to give me just a series of lines. Finally, I'm going to go to Path, and I'm going to click Union. And that's going to give me this. Okay. And before I go any further, what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this just so that I don't have to do it again. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to reflect it using this reflect button. I'm going to put it in place over here. Okay. So with one of these selected, what I'm going to do is duplicate this hair. It doesn't matter, I can get the lower hair, that's fine. So I'm going to duplicate this hair. And then I'm going to shift select my path, just one of them, and I'm going to do path intersection on that. And what that's going to do is it's going to trim that off on the outside, the same way I did with my shading. So I'm going to trim it off on the outside, and then we just have to lower that down. So I'm going to use the page down button, but you can use this button right here, but the page down button is going to be, a little more convenient until that's down below our hair, or our outline, sorry, in our face. Same thing over here. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to shift select my path. I'm going to do path intersection. Then I'm going to lower that down until it goes below my face. And what I've done is create a little bit of hatching, a little bit of shading here. That makes it look more hand-drawn. So we're going to do the same sort of thing with the eyebrows here. I'm going to add some thinner lines here at the eyebrows, and this time we're going to rotate them a bit. So I'm going to use my pen tool again. I'm going to draw a line. These ones are going to be thinner, because we don't want them to overwhelm the look of the eyebrow. I think that is a pretty good size. I'm going to go to, let's make this nice and long here. So because of the angle that we're going to be putting on this, it's much better if we make this extra long. And then we're going to go to path, stroke to path. Okay, I'm going to make a duplicate of this, and I'm going to move it over, and I'm going to rotate it quite strongly, really. We don't want to rotate it too much because we'll end up being a little short here. And the other thing I'm going to do is make sure that I'm moving it really high up, close to the edge here. So now I can select these two paths, and I'm going to go to extensions again and generate from path, interpolate. We don't want an exponent this time, so we're going to click 0 for that. And we're going to click probably 44 to 48 steps. Let's live preview that and see what that looks like. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. So I'll go with 44, and I'm going to apply that and close. Now, just like before, we have the beginning and the end path selected, but not the middle path. So I'm going to shift select the middle. I'm going to do object ungroup, and then I'm going to do path union, and that's going to create a single path here. Now there's a little trick. I now need to make a duplicate of my eyebrow, but it's really hard to click that eyebrow through this path. But if you hold the Alt button, ALT, and click on top of this eyebrow, you'll click down through the stack of objects. So now I have this eyebrow selected. I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to shift select my lines, and I'm going to do path intersection again. And that's going to give me this hatching lines here. I'm just going to lower those down underneath my lines. There we go. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. So let's create our line, and again we're going to give it plenty of length. I'm going to increase the size just a bit. I think that is similar. Maybe it's a little thicker. Let's keep that back a little bit. And then I'm going to do path, stroke to path on that. I'm going to make one duplicate. I'm going to bring it to the other end. Rotate that around. And again, put it really as high up as you can on this line, because we don't want to end up with our lines not reaching the top. And then we're going to select our two paths, and we're going to do extensions, generate from path, interpolate. Let's just have a look at our results here. So I think that this eyebrow maybe is a bit longer because our spacing seems a bit wider here. So I'm going to up this to 48. And I think that gives us a more similar spacing. And I'm going to click apply and close. Again, I have my first and my last path selected. I need to hold the shift button, select my middle, object ungroup, path union. And then I'm going to hold the Alt button, select my eyebrow. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to shift select my path here, and I'm going to do path intersection. There we go. I'll just lower that down under my outlines. And we have some shading here, some hatch work on the eyebrows, which I think really bring it a little more close to the original design. I find that the shading, the lines overwhelm the eyebrows a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this hatching here. And there's two ways I could go with this. I could lower it to a dark brown instead of a black. But I think what I'm going to do is use a linear gradient. And a linear gradient will make this, I'm going to use my gradient tool here, but a linear gradient will make this solid color to transparent color. And I'm just going to make that fade away a little bit towards the top. And I think that's just going to pull back the impact of that a little bit.
Interruption. Any grade 11 students last night getting A to D who have not
So I'll do the same thing over here.
Retakes, please head to the learning commons.
I'm going to select my lines. I'm going to apply a linear gradient and bring that transparent side to the top. And I'm bringing this down a bit lower, the solid color a bit below, just so that I get a fade, a nice fade at the bottom. And it just kind of pulls back the strength of that a little bit, because I do find it's a bit overpowering. So let's have a look. Alright, that looks pretty good. I think that we've kind of stuck with the original look. So the next thing that we can work on will be the freckles. And if you zoom in close, you'll see that there's a little bit of shading in the original drawing in this area. So I think I want to imitate that in my illustration. So I'm going to keep it pretty simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little area here that I want to shade. And so I'm drawing this point. I mean, I could give this a little more complexity, but I think I'll keep it simple. I'm going to go back to my original point, and I've made a closed object, and if I edit this, I can pull this down a bit. So what I'm going to do is just create a simple shading area under the eyes, something like this, okay? It seems a bit odd right now, but I think you'll see what I'm doing when we get it in place here. So let's just adjust this to just below the eyes, along the top of the nose here. And I'm going to give this just a little bit of a pinkish color. Okay, so I'm going to fill this, and I'm going to fill it with a little bit of a pinkish glow. Not sure really. Something like that, I think, like a peach. And I'm going to turn off my outline. And what I want to do here is I'm going to give this a linear gradient. So I want it to fade towards the bottom. So it's just giving me this upper cheek area, okay? Now, this is just the start. Obviously, we have too hard of an edge here. I mean, we could work with this and shape it, but the simple way to do this will be I'm going to give this a bit of a blur, which is going to soften this. So I'm going to lower it down underneath the nose here and eventually under the eyes. So I'm just clicking my page down button until I get underneath all of that. And then I'm going to go to my blur here, and I'm just going to blur this a couple of steps until I lose that hard edge right here. So I'm going to hit about 8. It probably will bleed a bit onto the eye area, so if it's not already under the eyes, you're going to want to move that down. So I'm going to go all the way to under the face, and then just bring it back one step so that I have this little bit of a pinkish glow. Now we can also play with the opacity of this, so if you find that this is too overpowering, what we can do is just simply lower the opacity until we get an amount that you feel comfortable with. So I think that looks pretty good. A little bit of a rosy glow there. I'm going to do a little bit more shading here. I'm going to shade this area under the eye, so we get a little bit of a darkening here under the eye. So what I'm going to do, keep this nice and simple, is I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to move it in, and I'm going to shrink it down just a little bit. And I think I'll even come in and reshape it a bit. So that it covers this lower area of my eye. And I'm keeping it just off the bottom because I'm going to be blurring this. And when we blur it, it actually bleeds a little bit, like it spreads. And I don't want it to spread too far, so I'm just keeping it right about here. I'm going to do path, object to path on it. And I'm going to give it a blur. And you're going to find that this is really strong. But once we get this blur in here and in the right position, okay, what we want to do is lower the opacity on this thing. So we could use our alpha level, I think is a better way to go. And that's just going to give me a little bit of shading on the underside of the eye. And that's going to give me a little bit more depth when I look at the picture. It's going to make those eyes pop a bit more. So let's go ahead and take this piece that we just made and duplicate it and reflect it, because we did that with the eyes. So this should fit nicely in the bottom here. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And now I can do the same thing at the top. So why don't I, well, maybe we'll make this one manually just to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just click a shape in here. So I start and then I go back to start. And I'm going to create this little sliver here. I'm going to fill it and I'm going to turn off the outline. And then I'm going to come back to my fill and I'm going to blur this. And I'm going to lower the alpha level just like we did at the bottom, until we have a pretty good look here. And then we can just duplicate that, take it over to the other side, reflect it, and we should get a nice bit of shading on the eyes. And you can play with the opacity of that. We really don't want it very strong, just a subtle little shade. And let's have a look at that. Just something to give that eye a bit of a feeling of depth. So I think that's looking pretty good. Now let's add in those freckles. So we're getting pretty close to the end at this point. So let's keep the freckles pretty simple. I think we can just use some circles for these things and just vary their size. So why don't we do the whole thing over here just to make our job a little easier for selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate these. I'm going to make the first couple here, and I'm going to vary their size just a bit. I think I don't really need to do a lot with the sizes and shapes because they're going to be fairly subtle, but I'm just duplicating them each time. And now that we have a little group of them, let's go ahead and select the whole bunch of them and duplicate the entire group here. And then we can just grab them and reuse them, move them around a little bit. So we don't really need to get these in the exact spots of the original drawing, but you know, we'll try to stay a bit true to the drawing. So let's take these and duplicate these, move them over, and then again we'll just tweak the positions. We'll put them into some new positions. And I feel like that's looking pretty good. Okay, so now we can select this entire group. We're going to do path. We're going to do path, object to path. We're going to do path, union. And now our entire bunch of freckles are all one piece. We can get them in here very easily. I don't think I like the position of some of these things here. So I think I'm going to rearrange them just a bit. So let's go to path and break apart. So we can move these around again, and let's just feel like these need to be a bit higher. I'm not sure what happened, but I don't like the looks of their position. So I'm just going to mess around with them a bit. Maybe I missed some of them. There, I think I like that a little bit better. Now for the color. Now it's going to be really hard since I broke these apart, but I'm just going to select them one by one. I'm going to union them again, and we'll play with the color a bit to get the right effect. So let's go back and do a path union on these things again. And make sure I got them all, yep. Then I'm going to play with the color a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click my skin tone here, and I'm just going to darken it ever so slightly to just get a kind of color that I'm comfortable with. I kind of like that, but I still find they're a bit strong, so I'm going to make them a bit more transparent. And possibly I'll throw a tiny bit of blur on, but I'm not sure if I like the blur or not. Yeah. Let's try it without the blur and see the difference. Maybe without the blur seems a bit more true to our style of our image here. Alright. At this point, we are pretty much done with this. Any other details are kind of just a bonus. So why don't we do one more thing to just finish this off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give this whole thing a fade at the bottom, which may or may not work. And also let's give it a background color. So we don't want this background to be transparent. So let's take a box here, and we'll get our entire area filled. And then we will, for now, put an outline on this thing. And let's fill it with white, solid. And I'm going to lower it to the bottom. Okay. Now I see, due to my layering system, I'm losing my drawing. So I guess I'm just going to leave it at this. So you can see our final image right here. We've got our original sketch, and we've got our final illustration. Let's have a look at this fade here. So let's give it a bit of a fade. So what I'm going to do is apply a linear gradient to this thing. And unfortunately, this is going to reveal what's underneath. So to deal with that, what we're going to do is, rather than make it transparent, is we're actually going to click here and choose white, and we're going to choose solid. And that's going to give us our white fade here at the bottom. Okay? And then let's do the same thing here. Let's give it a linear gradient. We're going to put our transparency at the bottom. And we're going to take that and we're going to make that white. And we're going to fade it to solid white. And that's going to give us our fade out at the bottom, just to make it look a bit more finished. I think I don't like how different that is. Maybe we need to add a middle stop in here, just to kind of get rid of the harshness of that fade. Yeah, I think that's a little bit better. just to give us some middle ground here. We'll cut down on the harshness of that edge. Okay. All right. Here we are. Now, let's take and draw a box behind this section. We're going to lower it down to the bottom. Okay. This will make more sense in a minute. We're going to open up our layers menu. I'm going to go to my layer 1. I'm going to unlock it. And I'm going to cut this. So I'm going to cut this. I'm going to come up to my ink layer. I'm going to paste it. I'm going to lower it down to the bottom. Put it in its place. Just as a comparison, I'm going to take my gray box here. I'm going to lower it to the bottom. And here we have our side-by-side comparison. Okay, so the last thing just to get this to match is I'm going to make this box white, completely white. And then I'm going to export this thing as a finished product. So let's save it.
Grade 11 student last name beginning E to I.
And we are going to
They have not had
do
to
File,
or require retake.
Export
Please look
PNG
for it.
image. We're going to export the drawing or selection. It'll give us the same thing. And I think I'm going to go for a standard resolution. So let's take this box and we'll actually give it a specific height. So let's make sure that this says pixels. And we're going to give the width 1920. We're going to give our height 1080. And that's going to give us a standard sort of resolution. And now holding the control button, I'm going to resize this. And so I'm just using a normal full HD resolution. And by holding the control, I'm going to keep that sort of resolution. There we go. And if we want to get even more technical, we could make sure this is all centered. But I don't think I'm going to, well, let's go ahead. So right here I've got my Align and Distribute menu. So I'm going to select my background, and then I'm going to shift select my lettering. And I'm going to choose last selected, and I'm going to align this by clicking center on vertical axis. Now this unfortunately ignores the 3, so let's try it again, but this time we'll group the title. Okay, and now we get a proper centering here. So that looks pretty good, I think. So our final step, let's export this thing. So export drawing, and I'm going to export it at that 1920 by 1080 resolution. I'm going to select where I want to export this. So this one is exporting on the desktop. But if I want to select, choose Export As. We'll give it a title. Finished inking. Click Save, and then we'll click the Export button. And what we should see is on our desktop, we now have an image of our final work. There you have it. Thank you very much for tuning in.